We sort of started with the beginning of Scripture and then in Matthew's ending. Kind of give you bookends, I think, to some degree, about what it is that we're called to be and do in this place. Jesus has remember, 11 disciples join him in Galilee. And when they see him, they worshiped him. And I love this phrase, some doubted. You know, part of the problem with the church sometimes is that we want to exclude doubt. We want to exclude people who have questions. We don't like to try to answer those questions, but in reality, in the reality of life, doubting is as much a part of faith as believing. Because doubting most times drives us deeper into the questions that trouble us, the questions that we don't understand. And we, I believe, grow as we pursue those questions. As long as we don't get cynical about it, but that we embrace it and understand that as a community of faith, we need to make room for people who have questions, to make room for people who doubt. How else do you make disciples unless you answer questions and you pursue them and you grow in your understanding? I'm glad we're all here today because what I want us to know is there's always a place to come to worship, even if there's doubt. You should never stop coming because there's things that trouble you, that you're not sure of, that you wonder about. Come and be in the community of faith. Share the questions of your life. The disciples are just like us, or maybe I should say we're just like them. They certainly weren't perfect, and we aren't. But God did not disqualify them because of that. God says, I have all power in heaven and earth. Authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. And I want you to do something about it. I want you to go and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's why this is on Trinity Sunday. But teach them everything. Teach them everything that I have commanded you. The words here in the verbs get mistranslated to some degree because they're all participles. It's not about going. It is about going. It's not about go. It's about going. It's a continuing action. And we need to understand that being a disciple is about a continuous life, continuous engagement with people, continuous invitation into relationship. For that's what I believe making disciples is about. It's about relationships. And even though we waver oftentimes between our praise of God and our belief in God and our indecision about things about God, where we are strong in our prayer, but yet we puzzle over so many things about faith, we are not excluded from being disciples. We are not excluded from the reality and responsibility that it means to be the church. And it's based on the divine authority that Jesus gives us and the power that sustains us in his presence. Because at the end it says, and I will be with you. You're not alone. I realize that you need some assistance along the way and that you can claim that assistance. The mission of making disciples is what we are about as a community of faith. It's not about just coming to worship. That's only part of it. Making disciples is what our community of faith should be about. Making disciples is about moving out into the community, sharing in a relationship way your life, your faith, your questions, but inviting them to come and share their life together with us. It's not limited by our weakness, and it's not in danger by our uncertainties. We are baptizing and creating community, bringing people together, not because we have all the answers, because we have a relationship with Jesus Christ that we can offer one another and be that for each other. We're not talking about cheap grace here. It's not just about cheap grace or a private faith, but it's about a rich and deeply committed group of people coming together to create a community that does not take God's goodness lightly, but lives out in the world the discipleship to which we are called. We're challenged to be disciples in our own neighborhood as well. These people around us, the neighborhood's in transition. Our church is in transition, but the neighborhood is maybe in a bigger transition. They need to know that there are people who invite them to be in relationship with God and Jesus Christ. This church should be that center or anchor as a place known where people can come and share together and live together without trying to force people into a particular mold or a particular way, but taking the time to teach them and grow together in love. We should be that center that welcomes people in our community. But more than that, we should be going out to them. For we are sent, going always going into the community to represent Jesus Christ to the world and to invite people into a deeper relationship. And one of those ways that we are in relationship and making disciples is a story that Becky wants to share with you today about her dad on Father's Day.
About a year ago, I lost my dad. Most of you know that. Sat right there, fourth pew back. We had to count. The man didn't like change. Fourth pew back. He sat there every Sunday, including 4 days before he died. And you were his friends. There's something I have to tell you, though. He was a curmudgeon. Now, I knew him a lot longer than you did, and I knew him when he lived in this little house on the corner on Cypress Drive, south of Atlanta. He bought the house there after World War II, like so many of him, hundreds of thousands of men and women. They bought houses, settled down. He went to work for Delta and settled down at this little house on the corner, which he proceeded, because he was so wonderful with his hands, to make bigger and bigger and bigger until it almost covered the lot of this little place on this corner south of Atlanta. It was a great neighborhood to live in, not unlike this one. Maybe a little lower class, but not unlike this one. And I grew up there riding my bike, and summer brought cookouts where we all came together. And I grew up there, and things changed in Atlanta. They changed south of Atlanta. Whether you liked change or not, it came. And the neighborhoods changed. And my father and I began to argue over the subject of race. I was at war with my church, with a segregationist pastor, and I was at war with my father. And he disappointed me, perhaps for the first time in my life. And so we argued for a while, and then we did what people do. You have people like this in your family. You cease to argue because you've said everything you can say to each other, and so you just say, "Pass the chicken." And you stop talking about it, but you still love each other, and you still talk about other things. And so life went on, and I left to marry Mike and went far away so that I wasn't home very often, maybe for brief visits. About 5 years later, I came back to the neighborhood. When we drove up, I noticed that my father's car was parked outside in the driveway. He had a huge garage that he'd built that was heated and everything, that was big enough to probably put 3 cars in. So I wondered about that, and I also noticed how different the neighborhood was, and who was on those bikes, on those streets, had changed significantly. But I knew I wasn't going to discuss it with my father. I would talk to my mother later. So we went, and we were having dinner that first night. we were sitting eating a great meal, and a knock came at the door. And I went to the door, and there was a little black boy standing there, and he said, "Hi, my name's Peter. Is Mr. Ralph here?" And I said, "Yes, but he's having dinner. Would you like to come in?" "Oh, no, just tell him I'll wait for him." So I thought, that's strange. So I went back to the table, but I knew better than to say anything, except, "Peter was there, Daddy. He's waiting on you." He said, "Oh, yeah, brr, brr, brr." So after supper, I cleared the dishes with my mother, and then I snuck out to the garage. The garage door was open, and the reason the car was out there was because along the walls of this garage now were bicycle tires and bicycle chains. And he was filling Peter's, well, about 3 or 4 other children watched. He was filling his tire with air. And they were discussing Peter's problem. I said, "Peter, I don't know, this patch doesn't seem to be holding up very well." And he said, "Well, Mr. Ralph, I think I took it over some gravel." He said, "Well, we're just going to have to put a new tire on." And Peter just beamed. My dad took down a new tire, and about that time he noticed me. And he looked like I'd caught him robbing a bank. My father did not like to be caught doing acts of mercy and grace. So back inside, I said to him, "Daddy, I have to ask." He said, "I know, kids, those kids." I said, "What happened there?" And he said, "Those kids." He said, "You know, it's not easy for their parents. We're moving out of the city, trying to make ends meet. A lot of them are working shift work, working at night." So those kids, sometimes their dads don't have time for this, but I've got time. I'm retired, so I fix their bikes. I said, "You fix their bikes?" Yeah. And Pedro down below, I helped him put up his carport the other day, and so we go through this whole thing, and I'm looking at my father, and he said, "It's those kids." See, I had forgotten too. My dad didn't have a father. My dad's father abandoned him when he was 5 years old, along with his brother and his mother. He knew what it meant to have no one to hear your problem or your story or to fix your bike. He had men in his life who stood in, and he turned out to be a very fine man. But those kids helped him remember what he was about. That house on the corner became very important to the whole neighborhood. They brought back their girlfriends for him to meet and their babies for him to put on his lap. And the day we moved them out of their house, they stood side by side on the street and they cried. My dad and mom's house was a little house on the corner. This is a big house on the corner. A big house. And it's not my daddy's house. And it's not your daddy's house. This is the Church of Jesus Christ. And there are kids in his neighborhood. Kids. Lots of kids. Not the same one that grew up here, the wonderful kids that grew up in Miss Francis's house. New kids. Lots of them look different from you. Many of them, you think they're going home and their mama has their dinner made? Are you shocked to find out this is not happening? Have you not noticed the signs of the schools that are having feeding programs? Are you paying attention to your father's neighborhood? People are hurting in these houses. Those children need someone to hear them, to love them. They're climbing over our fence, put gates in. They're looking to come home to someone who will care. Do you care? Will you be that person for them? They have no one else.